Thank you very much, Misha, for that fascinating presentation, which I'm absolutely sure is going to provoke a number of extremely diverse questions. Who would like to ask the first one? I'll hand it back to
I wonder if I can suggest this isn't strictly a question about Russia. This is a question about whether we might make more of the notion of minimal religion, because it seems to me that we might invoke the principal notion of the unconscious here, which would be that people don't actually know what they believe, and that people can tell themselves that they believe one thing, or think they believe one thing, but not actually believe it, and vice versa. So we might take, for example, something like a suicide bomber, where we might habitually think that what drives them to commit a bombing is the fact that they already believe, but we might say on the contrary that it's the performance of belief in the bombing, the fact that they don't really believe, but the bombing constitutes the performative enactment of their beliefs, whereby they hope that they might go to heaven in actu, through the act, come to believe through the act, rather than actually begin with the belief in the first place. And it strikes me that this kind of narrative, where we start to think about, we make a distinction between people who like to tell themselves that they believe, and people who really don't believe, or people who believe but tell themselves that they don't, that actually becomes the fundamental dynamic of what we might call something like postmodern religion. So, rather than what we have with the minimal belief, where we talk about having some connection with God that doesn't need to be performed through rituals and so on, it seems to me that surely there's a lot here that would be characteristic of a kind of nostalgia for religion, which isn't really religion in the first place. And we could use that in two ways. We could say that, well, that characterises both, I guess, what Slavoj Žižek calls this very light religion, Western Buddhism, this just vague desire for spirituality that doesn't necessarily fit with spirituality at all. And we can equally see that being present in someone like the fundamentalist, who doesn't really believe, but thinks that in the act of performing belief, they will come to believe anyway. So I simply pose that as the kind of question, isn't that an access that we can be looking at as well? And by contrast, if we take the same logic and we apply it to the construction of this logic of performance and disavowal, we apply that back to the people who go around smashing up the Russian churches in the 1930s, couldn't we say that rather than these people lacking belief who are nostalgic for it and want to perform it, they're people who actually do believe, but the act of performing their atheism is one that seeks to destroy the belief that they have, seeks to destroy God, rather than beginning from this position where they are genuinely atheistic.
So, thank you for the commentary, but what is the question, if there is one?
Well, so wouldn't that be... So, my thought here is, with regard to this notion of minimal religion, it strikes me that we already see something quite similar in something like the Protestant ethic of Max Weber, where Presbyterianism would be this minimalized version of Christian doctrine. And we know that in Max Weber, the thesis of the Protestant ethic was that they would desperately try and be economically successful as a way of persuading themselves that, they had been chosen, they had been elected. So the performance of belief then, whether or not they believe it or not, becomes more important than what they actually believe. So I guess my question is simply, isn't the axis in which we should be looking at minimal religion not simply one of taking people's claims about what they believe for granted, but rather looking at the discrepancy between what they say they believe and how they act, and whether their enactment of those beliefs is really consistent with what they tell us they believe?
Well, this hermeneutics of suspicion can be applied in any way and to any object, including minimal religion. But the topic of the unconscious is indeed very, very important, both for apathetic theology because it denies the possibility of consciously articulating any attributes of God, and therefore, so to say, moves into the deeper layers of the subconscious or unconscious, which actually were exploited by atheism, which in fact was a kind of negative, reverted religion with its own pantheon, its own gods, its own sacred writings and churches and so on and so on. This is a very deep question. I don't thank you for it, but I think I wrote an entire book on it. It's called Faith and Image, published in 1994. And it is so profound, and thank you for it, but I would prefer not to compromise it with too brief an answer.
So, try and ask a question which occurred to me about halfway through. The Reformation, which Joe actually alluded to, is of course a huge phenomenon of history and thought, but it really only happened to the Western Church. The Eastern Church didn't have a Reformation. Given that there are very many parallels between the poor, which even that word sounds not argument, it sounds personality, it sounds reformational in the strand of very minimal Reformationist tradition. So just in the same way that the Western Reformation was largely triggered by an overweening power of the Church itself, might we not see poor religion as a reformation in the Eastern Orthodox setting, triggered by an atheistic power from without?
Yes, thank you. It's an excellent question. Actually, some people believe that atheism was a perverted form of Reformation in Russia. And there is a very deep connection, in my view, between this negative type of spirituality, negative in the best possible sense, in the sense of negative theology, that prevailed in Russia. The silence, lack of theology, for example. Russia didn't have theology for many centuries at all. This fear to say anything about God. And nihilism of the 19th century and atheism of the 20th century, there are some deep connections. There were a series of reversals, so that according to negative theology, God does not exist, because we cannot say that God exists in the same sense in which this table exists or this wall exists. Yeah? So the denial of existence of God is, so to say, inscribed, which was the atheistic, so to say, affirmation, but it is inscribed in the reasoning of this kind. So I would say that minimal religion is a reversal of the reversal. The reversal that happened through atheism of this minimal religion, of this apathetic theology, that through the instrument of approach to God transformed into the instrument of annihilation of God and religion, turned out again to work for the affirmation of God in the negative way. And of course, the traditional Reformation movements or Protestant movements, such as Baptism or Lutheranism, they have very poor Pentecostalism, they have very poor representation in contemporary Russia, less than 0.2%. But this 25% is something real, and I would say, major conclusion from this presentation is that we need to investigate this silent majority, and if it prefers to be silent, we need to understand the theological and historical sources of this silence, how to explicate it. So if it is another form of Protestantism, how it relates to the classical forms of Protestantism. I try to relate it to the most radical form of Protestantism, the death of God theology, but of course there could be other comparisons. Thank you.
It might be a very simple, obvious question, but I just wanted to find out how you relate the notion of minimal religion to the stereotypical notion of the Russian spirituality. Are they the same thing? Are they different?
Which Russian spirituality?
Right, yeah, this is... in something specifically Russian, essential to Russian identity?
It is specific in the sense that the phenomenon of minimal religion emerged as the outcome, in my view, of 70 years of atheism in the Soviet Union, which is absolutely unique phenomenon in world history. There was no societies with mass atheism, official atheism, state atheism, however we can call it. And therefore, the post-atheist spirituality is something absolutely new. But Russian spirituality, it is such an idiom that can refer to anything, to vodka, to banya, to whatever you want. So it is not a concept. And everybody uses it at one's will. Fuzzy. Metaphoric expression. Yeah.
How does the Russian media cope with all this?
You see, I think there was a great amazement, and since the data were published only less than 2 months ago, there was no any thoughtful, weighted reaction. But usually the expectation were, and the usual image of Russian religious affiliations is that Orthodoxy takes about 75% of population. But it's interesting that about 15% of those who in previous polls claimed to be Orthodox don't believe in God. So, so this identity, I am Orthodox, is actually ethnic self-identification, which was registered in previous polls. These people who conducted this poll did it smarter. They asked, to which church do you belong, you know? And it turned out that in Russia, there are much more people who do believe in God without religious affiliation than those who claim to be Orthodox and do not believe in God. So I think that some deep reactions we still have to wait for.
There was another question back in the secretary.
Yes, in relation to your concept of poor faith to poor theatre, which strips back the scenario back to the body, and you parallel to this with the stripping away of ritual in order to get at the spirit. But it strikes me that this concept remains very much caught in a mind-body or spirit-body dualism. And I was wondering if you could say something about the place of the body in the theomonism that you're proposing would be the kind of next phase that will displace monotheism. Where is the body, where are bodily practices, and to pick up on Gerald's question again, because it strikes me that the theomonism that you outline is striving towards a universal that will strip away the culturally specific, and yet the narrative that you've given us is very much one that's embedded in a culturally and historically specific development, a reaction, if you like, to the course of Russian history throughout the 20th century. So where is the body in theomonism, and where is the culturally specific? And might it not be that theomonism itself might be the ethnic self-identification of the global citizen?
Well, it's well put. I would agree probably. Yes, that's why I believe that it is through apathetic or negative type of spirituality, again, not in negative but in positive sense, that we should expect some rapprochement of existing, at least monotheist denominations, rather through their, so to say, negotiations and conscious synthesis, so that Muslims and Christians and Jews will agree about what is their creed. It is rather through silence, through this negative side of spirituality, that this move towards unity could be accomplished, if theomonism at all is the perspective, global perspective. Regarding the corporeal aspect of poor faith, I don't have a ready answer. Because this needs to be investigated. This is completely blank area, you know. What actually we have, except some essays and manifestos, is this numbers in the poll, but there was no actually research of this category of the believers, though they have been registered already in the early 1990s. But I think that because of this concentration or focus on the ближнечувствие and ближнемыслие, that means neighborhood, so to say, close attitude to what surrounds one, some of these feelings should be especially, I would say, emphasized. For example, touch as superior to seeing, because it is the mutual relationship of two entities rather than distancing between them. I have a book about the feeling of touch. It is not about religion, but I think that this is one of the developments that if we are going to see something like aesthetics of poor faith, it would be moving in this direction of intimate feelings of touch rather than distant sight. And there were several exhibitions of touch art in Russia, in St. Petersburg, for example, touch art, where you are not allowed to look at things, you have to touch them. And among the people of similar, so to say, mindsets, maybe minimal religious mindsets.
The way that you presented minimum religion to me seems incredibly sort of coherent, like there's this sort of group of people who all belong to the same category. That's the impression that I had. And you started by giving us a statistical breakdown, and the category of these people who belong to this is a category that sort of is clearly built into this particular sociological survey. So I was just wondering whether there's actually room for greater plurality of attitudes towards religion, spirituality and so forth, greater plurality than the way that you presented, which would include also overlapping attitudes towards spirituality across different religions, across different professions, and having a far greater way of performing, doing stuff, rather than having one group called, belongs to some sort of minimal religion. There's a certain sort of humanistic approach to the whole concept here that I have slight trouble with, because I can imagine that there have been quite a lot of ethnographic study of people's attitudes towards religion. I'm not familiar with them, I have to say, but I can imagine it's something that anthropologists in contemporary Russia would be very interested in. And I can imagine that these ethnographies actually tell quite a lot of stories that needn't be all sort of fitted within a label that would then be cited by the Archbishop of Canterbury or Malcolm Jackson or somebody else in the West. But anyway, that's just a question. But
you see, the impression that it is one group is a purely statistical illusion, because this is the most diversified, dispersed group in the world, because these people never meet. Very rarely they know anything about religious or irreligious convictions of each other. They have no church, they have no rituals, they have no writings. So it's virtually impossible to investigate these people as a group, except for this is not a sect, this is not a confession, this is not a religion actually. It is a dispersed, fuzzy state of beliefs that could be united into one category only by such kind of a pole, sociological pole. But of course, if we continue to approach these people and to find new ways to investigate them, because you cannot come to the church like the Orthodox Church and to ask what are your beliefs, what are you reading, there is no way to do this. So it needs some different sociological approach, different polling, different theology, for which my musings are only, if not preface, but something very uncertain and as fuzzy as the group itself.
A similar question, really. I mean, you leap from the statistics that 40% of the population are members of the Orthodox Church, and 25%.
41.
Well, okay. I was just rounding it to the nearest 10. And 25% have a vague belief in God without any religious affiliation. And you seem to jump from that to say that that means 65% of the population of Russia have some adherence to minimalist religion. But how do you justify that assertion? Because couldn't one equally well suppose that it's basically a statement of vague agnosticism? That's my first question. The other is, do you think there's any connectivity between the minimalist religion you describe in Russia and the emergence of a post-atheist spirituality in the West? Because, as you point out, Russia crawled from feudalism into post-modernity and largely missed modernity and the rule of logic out of that process, and therefore didn't need to go through reformations which challenged the logic of its religion. Whereas the West clearly has gone through the Reformation modernity and is now into post-modernity where rationality is also less supreme and is opening up the potential of a atheist spirituality in the West. And I wonder if you think there are any common strands there, and of what is that spirituality made up? You suggest it's made up of silence and of negative theology. Isn't it also possibly made up of the recognition of, say, virtue, and the virtues as being a substance to an atheist spirituality?
Well, you can speak in this way. Referring to the first question, I didn't quite understand. You said that 65% of Russian population are, I didn't cite this.
40% members of the Orthodox Church and 25%, that's how I get 65%.
Yes, but they have nothing in common.
No, that's what I'm saying, but I took it rather as though you were suggesting that that implied that 65% have some concept of minimalist religion. And I'm questioning that assumption if that's what indeed you were saying, but maybe you're not saying that.
Well, Orthodox faith has nothing to do with minimal religion. It's 41% of people who go to the church.
They don't go, not go. Not go, surely. I've not seen 40% of the population going to the Russian Orthodox Church.
Well, who consider themselves belonging to Russian Orthodox Church. Indeed, not all of them go regularly to the church, it's true. But there is nothing, there is no common category for Orthodox and minimal believers in any larger sense than between Orthodox believers and Muslim believers or Buddhist believers. They are different categories. So this is your second question is, in my view, deserves quite articulate answer. Charles Taylor, in the book The Secular Age, does show some convergence between minimal religion in Russia and Western post-secularist spirituality. But what I found investigating, not as a specialist by any means, some statistics on, for example, American religious affiliations, the popularity of non-denominational Christian churches, which is absent completely from Russian reality. Non-denominational churches which have huge amount of followers, hundreds of thousands sometimes. They are close to Protestantism, but they claim to be non-denominational. Another interesting statistical fact about the United States is that the most fast-growing share of believers in the United States are those non-denominational Christians. Their number grew 40 times since 1990 to 2008. For 18 years, their number grew 40 times. And now they constitute about 8 million of believers in the United States. So this is also very surprising figure that needs some research, commentaries, but I think that some major process, global process, are common to post-atheist Russia and post-secularist West. I do believe this. And due to this typological similarity, there is possibility of immediate dialogue between non-denominational Christians, for example, in the United States, and minimal believers in Russia. So I imagine that this will happen sometime.
There was one other question at the back there.
I think you just answered that, but it was when that sociological poll was done, was there any criteria have been used to classify people like Orthodox or minimal religion? Was it asked, for example, questions if they were, for example, they were baptized in Soviet time, you know how parents used to do behind the Communist Party. But we were not doing any religious traditions or not celebrating any religious holidays in those times, but we still classified ourselves belong to Orthodox Church. But we don't go to the church, for example, some.
Yes, there are
so how to classify those, like, they baptize a Christian and they are Orthodox, belong to the Orthodox Church, but they don't go to the church, they don't celebrate anything, but they believe in God. So, where is any criteria there?
What is known now is known from the press conference that was held in December of 2012. The exact data are not published yet. But nevertheless, during this press conference, some of their findings, more detailed findings, were announced. And this is, they asked, not as in previous polls, who you are by something like to which faith or to which religion do you belong? 70% Orthodox. Now they asked, do you belong to Russian Orthodox Church? And this immediately decreased it to 41%. Out of this 41%, only 2% go regularly each Sunday to the church and participate in church services. Only 8% read ever Gospels, compared to 68% of those who read Gospels among Pentecostals and 48% among Protestants as a whole. So there is, as Archbishop Antony Surorsky, the great Russian spiritual authority who lived in London and was in charge of Russian Orthodoxy in England, he used to say that Russia was крещена, но не просвещена. It was baptized but not enlightened. And this is what we see now. Only 8% have read Gospels. And there are other political circumstances that, in my view, work for the widening, for the growth of this sector of people who believe in God but prefer not to belong to any affiliation. And this factor is ideologization and commercialization of Orthodox Church in contemporary Russia. And this is a special topic, how Orthodoxy becomes, in certain aspects, pop religion.
Well, as Misha said towards the end of his lecture, it's very, very difficult to draw a discussion on a topic of this nature to a close. So I'm going to do so by referring to the imperatives of catering. They're waiting to feed us. It remains only then to thank Misha once again for a fascinating lecture. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.